Hello everyone, this is John Higgins. I'm going to be presenting a case study of the Sesame Workshop. I'm going to start off with an overview of what I'll be speaking about during and throughout this presentation. First, I'm going to talk about the signs of a losing streak, and then I'm going to go into Sesame's core identity, and then I'm going to go into some of the reaction that occurred at Sesame prior to Dunn's arrival in response to the losing streak. And then I'm going to go into actions by Dunn to try to correct the course of Sesame and how he started to alter Sesame's identity throughout that process. And then I'm going to go into some of the Sesame successes, and I will end with that. So the first sign of a losing streak for Sesame would have been the decline in the distribution fees and the royalties. So in 2009, you can see that the distribution fees and royalties were at $47 million. By 2015, they decreased down to $27 million. Next, they did face some increased competition from some other broadcasters, some other network broadcasters, such as Disney and Nickelodeon. And really, this trend started to emerge for PBS as a whole around the 2000 time period. And ultimately, that kind of coincides with some of the households moving away from, or moving towards actually network television and cable. And Disney and Nickelodeon were both able to provide 24-hour-a-day broadcasting of the children's content, as opposed to PBS providing Sesame Street only once or twice a day. The production cost also started to outstrip the revenues at this time. You can see in 2011, revenues were at $475 million, and then by 2015, they were at $590 million. However, expenses through those same two periods there, $503 million in 2011, and then they rose all the way up to $622 million in 2015. So you see the flip-flop between the revenue and expenses in 2015, $590 million compared to $622 million. So they were operating in a loss at that time. Internally as well, the culture became risk-adverse, and the staff felt that operations and meetings were becoming inefficient. So the Sesame's core identity, really throughout this period, they have deep historic ties, and not just to PBS, but also to philanthropy. They have a big push towards societal impact, research. They feel that they are innovative and creative, and they have a big focus on child education. So prior to Dunn, Sesame's identity kind of drove some of the early responses to this losing streak that they were going into here. So if we take the issue of declining revenues, for example, the early response was to branch out from the core television that they were used to, but ultimately all that did was rise some production costs. But the silos really prevented a proper decision making and a proper response at that time. So then it started to hurt their image as well, and how the employees viewed outsiders' image of themselves. So the later responses is that they decreased investments into that same education that they branched out from initially, and then that caused some staff reductions, and then some of the senior leaders departed, and it became a vicious cycle of it also then negatively hurt their identity, and then negatively hurt their image following that as well. Now, the reaction by Dunn, before he even started the job, he emailed the 7 top executives the week prior in order to identify the issues. And the executives expressed concern that really the organization is unfocused, that it's risk averse, that they're slow to move, they're indecisive, they lack a vision, or that they're rudderless, and that the budget and the resources were unsustainable moving into the future, and ultimately that the organization has lost its way. So if we go back to Dutton and Dugaric, if you recall from the readings, they had a negative view of their identity, and they also perceived a negative image of their organization. So the identity would be the employees' view of themselves and the organization, and then the image would be what they perceived outsiders looking at their organization to be. Following the issue identification, Dunn then went out and met with all the direct reports as well, senior staff, the studio crew. He had an all-call meeting as well to try to open up communications and try to identify any further issues. And this is all within the first week. He then went out and tried to fill the senior staff with new faces, some of them from the for-profit world, and he did this all within the first 8 months. He also restructured the organization into 2 broad business units in an attempt to break down those silos. And he renegotiated with PBS for broadcasting rights. He didn't quite get what he wanted through PBS in order to fund Sesame moving forward. So then he went out and he negotiated a broadcasting deal with HBO, which is a big split from Sesame's historic ties and their identity. And I'll get to that a little bit later in the presentation. But internally, Dunn tried to simplify the mission statement as well. He stressed collaboration and communication to the employees and developed those as core values for the organization moving forward. And he eliminated the excess meetings and, more importantly, probably the deliberation that was taking place in the meetings, and made it more of a decision-making factory. He instituted leadership training, as he identified that as one of the weaknesses as well, through the 360-degree feedback that he also implemented. He also looked outside the organization for digital solutions when he realized that their innovation lab just wasn't quite cutting it any longer in the digital realm. So in order to compete with some of those digital platforms that were coming out, he looked to outsiders to develop new solutions for a digital platform. He also responded to criticism that came throughout that first year or 2 years there with a thought-out communication strategy. This is particularly true with the HBO deal that he garnered. And finally, he increased efforts to raise philanthropy from 5%, and the goal is to try to get that up to 20 to 25% in the long term. So how did he alter the identity of organization? I talked about that a little bit earlier. Well, he removed those deep historic ties that they had with PBS by negotiating a broadcasting deal with HBO. So this is a pretty big departure for Sesame. But however, that worked to increase the revenue and offset some of those rising production costs that I talked about earlier as well, that really weren't being covered by PBS. He also, as I mentioned, looked outside the organization for new innovation in the digital realm. And again, as Sesame viewed themselves as creative and the innovators, this is also a departure from the norm. But this did work to compete in that digital mobile world. They developed a YouTube channel, and they had posted story shorts on there that were a success. He also broke apart that legacy culture that I mentioned earlier with the silos through creating the two business units, but he also streamlined it as well and put all the production under one roof and enhanced the communication and collaboration amongst the employees. So this also comes out of the Dutton and Dukerrick framework. And on the left here, I put prior to Dunn, and on the right, I have post-Dunn reactions to the issue of declining viewership, as taking that as an example issue. So the interpretation prior to Dunn through the organizational lens of Sesame would have been that it was a lack of educational content issue. However, with that silo mentality that was in place, others throughout the organization would have said, no, it's not the educational content. Instead, it's the lack of engaging toys, and that's actually the issue. Others would have said it's a lack of skill and vision to create new content, and that's the issue. Or others would have said that the organization is rudderless and they don't have any leadership, and that's actually the issue that's driving the decline of viewership. So you see that there's a couple different schools of thought within the organization. Nobody was really wholeheartedly on the same page for it because of those silos that were created there. The event that triggered the declining viewership and those interpretations would have been that increase in competition from Nickelodeon and Disney, and then also the digital format competition that was out there, the apps, other child education cartoons and things that they could find now and that they could stream without having to tune into PBS to watch Sesame Street. The reaction to it, or the action that was accomplished prior to Dunn, would have been to push that content from the television to the classroom to try to broaden their structure out a little bit. However, that really just led to those increased production costs, and then that kind of led to increased staff cuts as well. So post Dunn, the interpretation was, hey, this is a business issue. The event is, though, due to that, is that we're becoming too commercial, and we're starting to lose some identity. So the actions were from that the HBO deal to try to stabilize the finances, but then Dunn countered that with the communication plan, and also countered some of that silo thinking with the collaboration and the reorganization and the look to the outside for the digital platform. So was everything successful? Well, Sesame did increase distribution fees and royalties. We can see in 2015, as I mentioned, they were down, slumped at 27 million. By 2019, they're back up to 67 million. Also, he beat the earnings here of 9.9 million with an actual of 11.9 million, so by about $2 million. And the ratings improved from all around 6 to 8 that they were typically hovering around on PBS prior to the change. They went to 3 after the change by the fall of 2016. And brand awareness went from 32% to 48%, which is also an important driver for some of their revenues. And internally, 90% of the employees felt informed about operations compared to just 67% in 2013. And the negative perceptions of the HBO deal went from 48% to 30% in 2016. And this is important as well because it's addressing another issue that came up due to an action by Dunn to negotiate that HBO deal. The communication plan and strategy that I mentioned did pay dividends, dropping the negative perceptions down. Okay, so that was the Sesame Workshop case study. Thank you.